All right, hold on, Gary, go ahead.
In Genesis it says that we're made in the image of God.
Yeah.
God is spirit. We're certainly not spirit.
Well, we have spirit,
We have spirit.
but we also have flesh.
We are spirit.
We are spirit. Right, and body.
But the point being,
We have body.
the point being, we are in the image of God, so therefore we are an image.
Yeah, so there's something,
Hands,
yeah,
eyes, feet.
maybe something to that. Yeah, very much so. I've taken the image there to be much more functional, but it can also, maybe it's also the physicality of it. Clearly you have God with body all over the place, and a man. Now I'm going to go this direction with you for just a moment. So I want your feedback on this because you'll help me out. Where do we find, I made the statement that from the time of the flood forward, the direction that God goes is to demonstrate His power and His presence by fire. So I'm going to give you some examples of those, and then you tell me other examples of where God in the Scripture uses fire. Burning bush, manifests Himself in the burning bush. Nadab and Abihu get smoked by fire coming out from the throne of God, so to speak, in the holy place, Leviticus 10. The cherubim, Genesis 3:24, have flaming swords. We're told we have flaming swords. Mount Sinai, we have smoke and lightning on the top of the mountain. We also find out that there are seraphim, burning ones, that are around the throne of God. I mentioned earlier in our teaching the chariots of fire. There's chariots of fire. Okay. We have in Daniel, God is in the fiery furnace. By the way, that's interesting because He says, how many people did we put in there? He says 3. He says, well, I see a man walking around in there. A 4th man walking around in there.
Like the Son of God.
Like the Son of God. Like a Son of God. Okay. And they're not, and by the way, it says when they pulled him out, there wasn't even the smell of fire on their clothes. All right. So Elijah calls down fire on Mount Carmel. Baal, if we look at the imagery, he's on a bull and he has lightning in his hands. So Elijah says to the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, you call down fire. Let's see whose God can bring down fire. And so there's this challenge on the top of Mount Carmel, and they go about all day trying to bring down fire. It doesn't happen. And Elijah just says, God, if you're the God of your people, send down the fire all of a sudden. And he says, put water all around this thing.
First, wet it down. Yep.
Yeah, wet the wood, and then put a trench of water all around this thing. And it says that the fire licked up the water. All right. Pillar of fire by day, pillar of fire by night. The voice of God is called lightning. So lightning and the voice of God, the idea of lightning coming. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed by fire and brimstone. Okay, I'm just priming the pump. Okay, you give me some examples of places where we find God manifesting in fire.
Manifesting, or like the 2 witnesses in the end called down fire from heaven.
Okay, all right. Yeah, the 2 witnesses called down fire. Yeah.
This is sort of as fire, but in Acts chapter 2, when they're in the upper room, it says, then there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire.
Yes, okay. Yeah, good reference.
How about Shavuot?
In what regard?
Tongues of fire?
Tongues of fire and Shabbat, that's because we have the same thing going on in Acts 2. I think there's a parallel between the two because they're both the same. Yeah, I think that's why there's a parallel. Other places where we have fire. I mentioned that one in the 3 and the fire, and then the 4th that a man that appears in there with them. Any other instances of fire? Yeah.
When the soldiers came to talk to Elijah, I guess, and they came like 3 times.
Yes, that's a great one.
Which one?
Yeah, she's mentioning the one where he's sitting up on the mountain.
Yeah.
And the king sends a delegation to Elijah. I think it's Elijah. Yeah. And he says, they sent 50 the first time. He says, the king says you got to come down. And he goes, I'm not coming down. And it says that the fire from the Lord destroyed them, the 50 of them. So the king sent another delegation of 50. He says, the Lord says you got to come down to me and come down with us. And he says, not coming. Fire from the Lord falls, destroys that 50. The 3rd guy comes and he says, look, You don't have to come with us. It'd be really, really nice if you did. However, if you don't want to, you don't have to, okay?
I'm just the messenger, don't kill me.
And he says, and the prophet, and it says the word said to the prophet, go with him. Okay? So, it says he comes down and he goes with this guy, right? But the third guy's like,
Who's gonna volunteer to be a third guy?
yeah. It's like, can you imagine being the third guy? Hey, look, we've had 100 guys be toasted. We need another 50 to go out there. You know what? Call me crazy here, but the first 50 and the second 50 have been toasted. I'm just going to speak to the guy real nice and say, we're requesting that you come down. All right. So yeah, that's any more?
A little humility goes a long way.
Huh?
A little humility goes a long way.
Yeah, a little humility. Never hurts. Any others on fire? So God uses fire to manifest His presence. Yeah.
Hail and fire is in the 10 plagues.
Hail and fire in the 10 plagues. Okay, yeah. I mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah. It also occurs in the 10 plagues. Good one. Yeah, mentioned burning bush. Yeah, mentioned that one. Any others? There's more than that, but we'll stop for there. All right. So what I want you to see is this. One of the weapons that God has at His disposal is fire. He can use it.
How about hail and fire?
Yeah, that's in the 10. Yeah, the hail and the fire falling together. So in the 10 plagues on Egypt. All right. So yeah.
But this concept of fire is dual, because in Malachi he says, I will sit over you like a refiner of silver. He
Yes.
uses fire as a refining process.
Exactly.
Not just a destruction.
I agree.
Well, yeah.
Absolutely.
But it's still
Yeah.
His presence.
That's true.
Yeah, it's used as a metaphor for God. Yeah, He's used it a couple times in the prophets like that. A cleansing and a refining.
Yep. He says he will purify the Levites like a refiner of silver.
Yeah, the Son of Man has fire coming out of His eyes in a couple times. Here's an interesting one. This is in the Gospels. And you'll remember that it's the son. They're called the sons of thunder. Two of the disciples, and I'm trying to remember the incident. Some of you may be able to help me on this, where they say Yeshua is criticized, and they say, "Hey, can we just call down fire to destroy them?"
Yeah.
And He says, "No, not right now." Anybody remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The woman of the well.
Was that the one as well? Okay.
No, that's not, what? No.
Yeah.
Because that's the yeah.
And they came back by, and Yeshua was going down to Jerusalem for the feast. They wanted to stay there. He spent 2 days with them. Wouldn't recognize him.
Okay.
The disciples said, "Hey, let's just nuke him and go our way."
Okay.
That's the one.
Oh, that's the one. Okay, I got to look that one up. I know. Okay. Now, segue.
Bill, do you remember when that was at?
Is that in John 4? That's where the woman at the well is.
Yeah.
It's John 4.
It's in that
Is that area?
area. Speaking of the woman at the well,
Okay.
he stayed there with 2 days. The disciples went off.
Okay. All right. We can look that one up. I'd like to look that one up. That's kind of an interesting one. But I think it fits with. I like to tie these up when we can. All right. Now, segue to our text today in regards to Leviticus 25. We have 3 texts in the Torah that speak about servanthood, or what some would call slavery. We have Exodus 21, we have Leviticus 25, which are our text today, and we have Deuteronomy 25. In the notes, I talked with you about Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15. Okay, should be Deuteronomy 15. So I give you some notes there on Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15. We also have our text today, Leviticus chapter 25. I want you to go to the page where I put down the Torah commands regarding slaves. Torah commands regarding slaves. I don't know if you noticed that the last verse of Leviticus that we read, which was 26:2, speaks about the Shabbat. Did you notice that? The last verse of our reading. Somebody want to read that? Leviticus 26:2. Leviticus 26:2, read it out loud. So we read Leviticus 26, verse 2.
You shall keep my Sabbath and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord.
Okay. And what have we said about the Sabbath before? With regards to those who are slaves or who are servants.
They get Sabbath.
They get the Sabbath off, right? So what does the Sabbath do? It becomes the equalizer to say that everybody's on the same level. Whether you're a master or a servant, you're on the same plane on the Shabbat, because you both take that day off. You both cease from your labors. So here's what we have. I put that number 1. According to number 1 here, the slave should not work on the Sabbath. Both Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 say that. Here's the big one. This is huge. Number 2, unlike other nations, Israel should not extradite runaway slaves from other nations. In other words, Israel was to be a haven for those who were running away from slavery, who were running away from those who oppressed them. The nations around Israel had extradition treaties with each other. So, and we find this in the literature, so that if a slave ran away and ran to one of these countries, the slave would be returned and then summarily killed as a way of sending a message to everybody else. Hey, look, you can run, but we will find you and we will get you back, and when we do, this is what happens to you. It doesn't pay to run, because we will find you and we'll get you back. And when you come back, you're coming back to die. So Israel is to be a place where one finds freedom. Number 3, slaves must not go away empty-handed, but with enough to sustain themselves. Deuteronomy 15. Can't just send them away without anything. They have to have the basic necessities of life to support themselves. Number 4, slaves bought or born to a priest may eat his portion, according to Leviticus 22:11. Number 5 and 6 refer to the treatment of servants or slaves. No slaves to be treated in a ruthless fashion, and no physical abuse of slaves are tolerated. You're not allowed to punch them, hit them, beat them. That's not permitted. Okay? So you're not allowed to... we'll talk about this in just a moment. And then slaves are going to be released after 6 years. Okay? Within Israel itself, the reason we have slavery for the most part is this. When individuals borrowed money and could not pay that money back, you had 2 options in order to pay back your debt. You could either let your land be used for a period of time to pay back your debt by another person, or you could yourself or a member of your family work for the person that you owe the debt in order to pay it off. Okay? Those are the 2 ways in which one could release themselves from debts. The land could be given over to, but the land was not to be given over in perpetuity, only for a limited amount of time. The most the land can be used was 49 years. Okay? You can use the land for 49 years. Then you have the Yovel, the Jubilee. The land goes back to its original owners. Okay? So that the crops from that land can be used to pay off your debt. Or a person could work for another person who they owed money to and pay off their debt by working for that person in order to reduce their debt. So you can either work it off, or you can allow your land to be used, and then whatever is taken from your land is used against your debt.
What word are they using? Because in my mind, in the English brain that I have, if I hear the word slave and the word servant,
Right.
Subtly I envision, Alex Haley's roots on one hand,
Right.
and
That's why I wrote what I wrote. Right. That's why I wrote. Yeah.
what's their word that they use?
They're using the word eved. Okay, eved. And here's the problem. The different translators translate it as, some of them translate it servant, some of them translate it slave. Okay, that's the problem. What happened to Israel, now here's the key. What happened to Israel in Egypt is what I would call slavery. When you take another person against their will, oppress them, physically oppress them, have them work only for you with minimal amount of time and energy to themselves, and you beat them, you oppress them in perpetuity, then that's slavery. Okay, that would be slavery. Debt servitude is different, where if I borrow money from you, and I say to you, Kirk, I need $50,000 to plant my crops, but I'm going to bring in $150,000 worth of crops, so I'll give you that 50 back plus another 10, and I'll still have plenty for myself. Well, then we have a drought, and my crops don't come in. You have money stored away, so you're fine. You don't care. You're all right. But I still owe you the money I owe you, and so I say to you, tell me what I'm going to do. I'm going to come work for you and pay off this debt. Or I'm going to give you a good size of my land that you can plant, and you can then use to pay off my debt. You can do either one of those. Okay, that's a different thing than you oppressing me and you beating me, and that's not to be allowed within Israel. There you go. Go ahead.
Well, that happened in this country too, because people come over from England, they were called indentured servants. They would come over,
Yes.
they would work for people who paid their passage or whatever.
Yes.
You know, owing the money until for 7 years, and then they were free.
Yeah, so you had that kind of thing going on. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. It's a good point.
Part of the law of the Shemitah is the release.
Yes, absolutely.
And another thing is, when you treat a brother or a sister in the Lord as a slave, you make yourself to be Pharaoh.
Right. Which is why you see over and over again from the time of the Exodus forward, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, what you see all the way through for this is this. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Do not treat people this way. The overarching ethic that really starts to run its way throughout the Torah and beyond is this. You know as a people what it's like to be oppressed and treated in cruel fashion. Make sure you never do that to another people group. Never let that happen. Now, I'd love to stand here and tell you that Israel listened to what the Torah said, and they treated their fellow Israelites with respect and with dignity.
Didn't happen.
That would not be true. Because when we get to the prophets, we find two things. They're oppressing their own people and keeping them beyond the 6 years on the debt release, and they're keeping the land beyond the Shemitah. They're not even observing this whole concept. They're not even looking at the Torah to observe it. Yeah.
Brent, another thing is, if you make yourself to be like Pharaoh, you got to remember what happened to Pharaoh.
You get destroyed in the process.
That's right.
Yeah. God's judgment comes. And so the prophets come to say, you know why we're going to go into captivity? You know why we're going to go? You were told, for instance, to let the land lie fallow. You haven't been doing that, so I'm going to give the land its rest. You haven't been giving those who are servants their rest. You've been treating them like slaves, so they're going to get their rest. The land is going to get its rest.
For 70 years, right?
Yeah, for 70 years. 1 year for every Sabbath, Shemitah. Yeah. So, okay, it's like the old Fram commercial. I don't remember the Fram commercial. God is like the old Fram commercial. The guy used to come out and he'd say, you can buy this oil filter, and you can buy your oil, and this will keep your car running. So, you can pay me now, or you can pay me later. Because either way, you're going to pay. You can pay a small amount to keep the car running by changing the oil, changing the filter. Okay, all that maintenance, you can do the maintenance. That's a little bit every now and then. Or we can repair the whole engine when it falls apart. You pick. Okay, God says, look, you can do it my way. You can do what I said. You will get away with it. You will get away with it for a while. My grace and mercy will allow for some of that. But here's what happens. It catches up with you. It does catch up with you. This disobedience, if you're my people.
Right.
Yes.
God says you can do it my way, or in the end, you're going to do it my way.
Exactly. Yeah. It's either do it my way now, or do it my way later. Either way, this is why we have Malachi 4:1 and Micah 4:1, and why we have Isaiah 2. For the word of the Lord will go forth from Zion, and the Torah will go forth from Jerusalem. You know what's going to happen? You can pay me now, or you can pay me later. One way or the other, you're still going to bend the knee. You can decide to do it now, or you can decide to do it later, when you're forced to. You can do it voluntarily, or you can do it under compulsion. But either way, it's going to happen. Now, this goes to our Isaiah text. If you read the Isaiah text, he says, there's coming a day when the buyer and the seller will be equal, when the master and the servant will be equal. I'm going to make this right. The economic disproportion will one day be made right, so that there's not oppression.
It's almost too much to not notice this next commentary, but I was saying to you before, the Pope is coming to the White House on Yom Kippur. Then he speaks to Congress, then he goes to speak to the United Nations. This is the Shemitah year, right? 50 years since they took the Temple Mount, 70 years since they came, the blood moons, all of those things are together. And I recently became aware that the purpose of the Pope's talk at the United Nations is to bless or to say I agree with a program called Post-2015. And he's basically coming to the United Nations to say, let's wipe out everybody's debt.
Mhm.
All the third world nations and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I don't, again, it's eschatology, however you say it.
Yeah.
Time study.
Eschatology.
Eschatology it's kind of hard to get.
Well,
and there's
yeah.
so much to it.
I've been thinking about this because others have been talking about this concept. Look, let's put it this way. If there's not a time where, with regards to national debt for all countries involved, if there's not a time where we don't push the reset button, eventually everyone will economically collapse. That's where we're coming to. Okay? That's where it's headed. We've already seen certain nations go that route. We've already seen certain nations economically collapse. And eventually it'll be like dominoes, because the debt will get to a place where nobody can even pay it, and then what do? So if there's not a reset button for national debts of all these countries, eventually the economically will fall. So we're already in that process, I think. We're already in that process. This is why the Torah said there needs to be an economic reset button within Israel. And this should be a paradigm for the nations, because if we don't have that, eventually there's economic collapse. If we don't say to everybody eventually, hey, look, after your land has been used for 49 years, after your body has been used for 6 years, then enough is enough. The debt's not paid off at that time.
It's paid off.
Done. It's paid. That's where we are. So, questions or comments?
Well, so much of this is covenantal language too, because.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Everything is covenantal. Everything is connected to covenant. It's always that way. Yes.
So the concept of interest probably would not be really a good thing.
No, because if you look at the way the Torah reads, it says if you loan your brother, and it's speaking of business loans, if you loan your brother any kind of loan, you don't charge interest.
Right. So really, you shouldn't even do that as a business at all.
Which is why these. Well, look, a long time ago, this is why national debts can't be paid off, because look, once you have the interest, it's compounding so rapidly that nobody can even. You can't even pay the interest, much less anything on the principal.
Well, bringing it home too, people going into bankruptcy.
Sure.
Because they can't.
And oh by the way, this system is designed where it's very, very slick in the credit cards that people use, because what happens is they only want you to pay on the interest. They don't want you to pay the principal. Because that just keeps compounding. And you get 22% interest, nobody can ever pay it off.
Yeah.
So all you're ever doing is paying down the interest. So this is the kind of system. Well, now if you bump that up to the national levels, they can't even make a dent in the principal, because the amount owed is so huge that the interest being paid is just exponentially going to a point that nobody can pay it.
And at the point we can't even pay our interest anymore.
Right.
We've gone beyond that.
Yeah. So it's
It's mind-boggling.
It is absolutely mind-boggling. But here's the thing. Now I go back to what I said earlier. Here's where I find comfort. Here's where I find comfort. There's a man in a chariot on a throne, and he's got an army, and he rides the wind, and he rides the waves, and he's out there to protect. And no matter what happens in the world, I'm on his side.
Amen.
So you know what?
Glory be to him.
Glory be to God. Whatever happens, happens. And I can rest in this man, this one who has an army, who has fire on his side, who is stealth and who guards his people, who has fire at his disposal, and who surrounds his people at all times. So, again, I don't know what the future holds, but I can tell you who holds the future. And that's okay. We'll be okay. And I say that because as time goes on, there's a lot of people who write and they want to, whether they intend to or not, they intend to instill fear. And apocalyptic thinking oftentimes runs on this fear-based approach. And I want you and I to not have any fear, that everything is in his hands and everything is under his control. He is still sovereign. And by the way, this chariot, as we see in Daniel 7, is also a throne. So he's not out of control. While the world looks like it's spinning out of control at times, he's in control. And everything will work out, and everything will go according to his plan. And in the end, we'll be okay. Because we are in him and with him. And that's where we have to leave it. And that's okay. We're going to be okay, no matter what happens. And here's the other thing to think about. All they can do, whoever they is, whoever they may be, the only thing they can do is destroy the body. But they cannot destroy the spirit.
That's right.
They cannot destroy that. They can take the body, but they can't take my spirit. That belongs to God. And even if they take the body, glory be to God, he has conquered death, and therefore, with resurrection, we shall be with him, and that's okay. It's all good. All right.
Good plan.